Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Jordan Giddins, or Giddo to his friends from Flint in my constituency, was 18 years old when he died, and tomorrow marks the 5th anniversary of his passing. At age 11, he became unwell with a mystery virus, and little did he or his family know that it would be the start of a 7-year battle with a deadly illness. It was determined that Jordan had HLH, which has a very long name that I won't mispronounce, but it's a very rare blood condition that usually impacts infants and young children. Jordan attended Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool and had various courses of steroids and chemotherapy, which seemed to be working. He was eventually able to return to school, catching up on the time that he's missed and starting his life once again. 9 months later, he suffered, sadly, a relapse, which the doctor said could only be cured by a bone marrow transplant. At this point, he was just 13 years old. His sister Beth was 16, and she was a match. No greater gift could a sister give to her brother than a life-saving donation. And 4 years later, it was something as innocuous as having a slight pain in his shoulder that got worse and eventually led to a scan which uncovered a golf ball-sized mass on his ribs. Further biopsy was carried out which confirmed it was a Ewing's sarcoma, another very rare form of cancer which mostly affects children and young people. It all started again, even more intense than before. The regime for the treatment of Ewing's sarcoma, as my honourable friend mentioned earlier on, was more than 50 years old. Mandy, Jordan's mum, was a nurse practitioner. In her words, "I've never seen anyone suffer like he suffered with this course of treatment. It's basically giving adult-level chemotherapy to children, and their bodies just can't cope with it." He celebrated his 18th birthday hooked up to a drip in hospital. Still upbeat, as was his way, he was making so many plans for the upcoming year, a music festival, a lad's holiday with his friends. But over the Christmas period in 2016, he became unwell again and the relapse was confirmed in January. There was no relapse protocol, and after a couple of experimental treatments, he passed away on the 27th of April 2017. Mandy talked about her anger that we're still using treatment protocols from 50 years ago on children. She paid tribute, however, to the staff in Glenclwyd Hospital in North Wales, Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool, and the Specialist Cancer Centre in Clatterbridge on the Wirral. As my right honourable friend mentioned earlier on, the problem is one of research. They say childhood cancer is rare, and it is. Childhood cancer counts for less than 1% of all cancers in the UK. It's easy to talk about it in those terms. 1% is nothing. But that 1% is 1,800 new cases diagnosed every year in children between 0 and 14. 1,800 sons and daughters who go through devastating and punishing treatments. 1,800 families with constant anxiety about whether their son or daughter will become part of those statistics. It's 1 child in 500. Suddenly, it doesn't seem so rare at all. But Jordan's passing didn't end his story. Jordan, or Giddo as he was called, had a gift. The gift of brightening up the lives of the people with whom he came into contact. And a charity, Giddo's Gift, has been set up in his name to provide gifts to make the lives of the people suffering, as he and his family did, a little bit more bearable. Since 2018, they've granted 176 financial wishes, along with 23 bereavement grants, £112,000 in total, and I'm proud to report that the local community in Flint has raised £263,000 and counting. So my plea to the Minister, who I know is extremely big-hearted and cares deeply about this issue, is sit with these families, hear their stories, and make sure that no parent ever has to bury their child again.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I start by congratulating my honourable friend from Gosport for securing this debate. We do talk many times about cancer in this place, whether it's at oral questions, in Westminster Hall or indeed in backbench debates, but very rarely do we talk about childhood cancers, and it's crucial, as we've heard today, that we do. And to lead and listen and learn from the experience of Sophie and the campaigns that she started that her family are continuing today. There have been many contributions, and I want to list as many as I can. We heard from the Honourable Member for Allen and Deeside, who shared his experience of his son. The Honourable Member for Scunthorpe, who shared the experience of her constituent Laura, whose daughter Emily was affected. The Honourable Member for Adrian Shotts, who told Rehan's story. The Honourable Member who shared Jordan's story from Dellen. The honourable member from North Cornwall, who contacted me ahead of the debate to talk about his constituent Talon. The honourable member from North Antrim, who mentioned Jake. The honourable member for Coventry North West, who told us Ben's story, who sadly died. The honourable member for South Cambridgeshire, who talked about Georgia. The honourable member for East Renfrewshire, who mentioned River and their experience. And the right honourable member for Romsey and Southampton North, who told us George's story. We also heard about Ruby from the honourable member for Dulwich and West Norwood, and about Alice, who's doing well, thankfully, from the honourable member for Sevenoaks. Also, we heard about Elsa from the honourable member for Leeds East, and Liam from the honourable member for Tonbridge and Malling. The right honourable member for Pudsey contacted me ahead of the debate to tell me about his constituent Catherine Beaumont and her nephew Oliver, who sadly died last year. And we also heard from the honourable member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk about Julia. The honourable member for Meon Valley told us about her own personal experience, but also of her constituent Alison's son Jake. And finally, the honourable member for North Norfolk talking about Benny, and the honourable lady from Hartlepool talking about Isabella. I think I will give way just for one time.
Thank you. Very briefly, I think the common thread in all of those stories was families who'd lost a loved one who still wanted to make a difference for future families, which is the same as my constituent Laura McQueen, who sadly had to endure the loss of her daughter Jess at the age of 9 to a rare form of cancer. It was heartbreaking hearing her story, but what she is doing now is continuing to call for more investment and research into childhood cancers, and I hope the Minister will hear that loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that the names that we've read out this afternoon just show that while cancer in children does only account for 1% of cancer cases, if you are in that 1%, then it doesn't feel very rare at all. And just to thank all honourable and right honourable members for sharing the stories of their constituents. It does mean that, as has been pointed out today, that GPs will only really see 1 or 2 cases of childhood cancer over the course of their career. And so these are difficult cancers to spot, and it can be difficult because some of the symptoms do reflect other illnesses and other conditions. Now, NICE guidelines are trying to support GPs. The NG12 guidelines underpins cancer referrals, and it sets out detailed guidelines for GPs on the symptoms of cancer in children and recommending very urgent referrals, and we mean an appointment within 48 hours for children presenting with a wide range of potential cancer symptoms, from unexplained lumps to bruising or bleeding. And the guidance also recognises the knowledge and insight that parents have, and it sets out that GPs should consider referrals for children where their parents are just not thinking that their child is well, or there's just something not quite right with them. And that referral should happen when parents are concerned, even if the symptoms are most likely to have a benign cause. I won't, if you don't mind, just simply because we haven't got a huge amount of time. Now, NICE regularly reviews and updates these guidelines for suspected cancers, and it urges GPs to think of cancer sooner and lower that referral threshold for tests, and ultimately catch cancer sooner, which not always saves lives, but can make a difference if a cancer is diagnosed earlier. Now, to help GPs identify signs and symptoms of these childhood cancers, there is education programmes such as the Gateway C available, which is online, but also face-to-face education sessions have now resumed, including multiple seminars offered by providers such as Cancer Research UK. And primary networks are now establishing cancer clinical lead groups to share latest research and also share good practice. The rarity of cancers in children, as the Honourable Member for North Antrim pointed out, means that it is harder to diagnose outside of the specialist setting, and many of the symptoms can mimic other illnesses. For example, diagnosing brain cancers in children is particularly challenging because it often presents in a similar way to epilepsy. And sarcoma symptoms can often start with limb pain, which is often a common complaint in children. It's therefore crucial that children up and down the country have access to specialist services in cancer care, which aren't always provided in most hospitals, where traditionally cancer services are arranged by cancer type. Children's cancer services need to be contained in small number of specialist units, which we refer to as PTCs. And each child with a suspected cancer should be referred directly to a PTC, which will make the diagnosis and direct provision of treatment. Now, in England, we have 14 of these centres, and they manage care through the multidisciplinary teams and drive diagnosis, treatment and, crucially, which we've heard from many honourable members, research participation as well. And as well as diagnosing the condition, they are experts in offering psychosocial support, helping children continue their education, helping, as Sophie campaigned for, to provide specialist play facilities 7 days a week, which I know Sophie's complaint was they only provided it for 5 days. And it's important that we hear from children and young people who are receiving a cancer diagnosis. And I personally like to thank charities like Young Lives vs Cancer and the Teenage Cancer Trust, who last year put together guidance for young people in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on discussing having a visitor and hand to hold when they're having their cancer treatment. This is really a useful guidance and has been distributed by the NHS to all our cancer alliances in England. Now, can I just touch, Mr Speaker, just on the issues that Sophie was particularly campaigning on? Food, I think, was a big bugbear of hers. I think she described it as disgusting in some of the reports that I read. And we know that food is important for all patients, but particularly for children, because nutritious food is a way of aiding patients' recovery. And it is difficult in hospital. I know from my experience as a nurse, we always serve food either at 7, 12 and 6, and if you're hungry in between, it's often very difficult to get any food at all. So we are working extremely hard to improve hospital food following the publication of the independent review in October 2020. And the review has made a suite of recommendations across several areas, including nutrition and hydration. And the 3-year plan named Great Food, Good Health, led by NHS England, is underway to implement the recommendations from that review. So I'm hoping that Sophie and her family will be pleased that we are making some progress with that, because I fully recognise the complaints that she made through her experience. Now, I just want to touch on research because it came up so much in honourable and right honourable members' contributions. And it is important that we do improve treatment, but crucially the side effects of treatment, because we've heard from many members that childhood cancers can have a very successful outcome in terms of survival, but very often the impact of those treatments can have a lifelong effect for those with cancer and their families. I can reassure honourable members that research is taking place. Since 2019, the NHS has been offering all children with cancer whole genome sequencing to enable more comprehensive and precise diagnosis and access to more personalised treatments that will reduce the number of young people experiencing long-term symptoms from their treatment. There's been a lot of progress in the treatment of childhood cancers, with the majority of children now surviving. However, for certain childhood conditions, such as rhabdomyosarcoma, this is not yet the case. And research is crucial into how we deal with this in the long term. Now, the NIHR, which funds research across the board in the NHS, is funding childhood cancer research across its whole remit, from early translational research right through to clinical research and also social care research. I'm concerned about the Honourable Member for Scunthorpe, where she raised the case of researchers in her constituency finding it difficult to access those funds and go through the application process. And I'm very happy to meet with her and her researchers to see if we can unlock some of those jams. There is support for research into rhabdomyosarcoma at the Royal Marsden Biomedical Research Centre, and I declare an interest, Mr Speaker. I still work as a nurse at the Royal Marsden. Also at the Royal Marsden Clinical Research Facility, and also with Great Ormond Street at their Biomedical Research Centre. So we are making some great inroads into research just to fund the cancer treatments, but also the effects of treatments as well. Due to time, there's so much more I would like to say to answer honourable members' questions, but just to reassure the honourable lady for Gosport, the 10-year cancer strategy that the Secretary of State has just announced is to tackle many of the issues that she's raised, The call for evidence has recently closed, but I think it's a great opportunity to put forward the case for childhood cancers. And after the debate today, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to meet with her to see if we can push her case